I just thought I'd make a quick video detailing car setups, what to look for, and where to look for car setups in AMS2. So whenever you're in the vehicle, you have a menu to the right hand side which has a tuning setup button, and that is what brings up the car setup. So the first page you see is the generalized car setup page, which gives you some quick options for generalized and important things, your fuel, front and rear downforce, that kind of stuff that you might want to change very quickly. It also gives you options for force feedback gain for each vehicle, and also tells you which setup you have loaded and the description of that setup, and you can also load and save setups. It also gives you the pit strategy button, which is something Jared made a video about how to pit and stuff like that, and if you want to set up a strategy, that's where you do it. So whilst this vehicle setup page is quite simplified, there are a lot more setup parameters available. To do that, you have to click the advanced setup option here, which brings up this page that you see right now. Now, vehicle setup is divided into 3 tabs: tyres, brakes and chassis, suspension and drivetrain. So tyres, brakes and chassis details the actual tyre itself, so your compound, as well as your pressure that you set them on, also your brakes and your chassis options as well. And chassis options basically is your aerodynamic options in terms of front and rear wings or flaps and so on and so forth, and also some other chassis parameters such as weight bias if you have the option able to do that. So immediately you're probably looking at a couple of these parameters here, thinking, oh, there's more than there is in R3E, and you're not wrong. There's a lot more options available to tune in the AMS2 vehicle models. So things like brake duct opening means you can increase the cooling or decrease the cooling of your brakes, and there's various reasons why you'd want to do that. You've also got things like longitudinal weight bias, which here in this vehicle means you're moving the ballast that the car has to reach a minimum weight forwards and backwards in the vehicle, and obviously that can affect the vehicle handling. So immediately you're probably seeing as well that I've got a wet tyre on one corner of my car and a soft slick on the other one. Basically, I've turned off symmetrical setups. So if I want to make my setup symmetrical, I just ensure that this tick mark here that is glowing when I hover over it is blue. And as you can see, it's now copied the selection from one side. So I've now got soft slicks on both rear axles. So now on the rear axle rather. So if I then select a new tyre, it copies that over to the other side. Now by deselecting this, it means I can then control all of the parameters which might be symmetrical independently. So you can do some fun things like having different tyre compounds on each of the corners if you so desired. Moving on to the suspension tab, as you can see, the suspension is divided up into 6 areas: front left and front right, rear left and rear right, and front centre and rear centre. So in each of the corners of the vehicle, so front left, front right, rear right, you have the parameters which associate with that specific wheel. So you've got the geometric parameters of caster and camber, you've also got ride height at each corner, you've also got your spring rate and your damper settings here, and you also have the option of adding in a bump stop. Now what bump stop does is it limits the travel of the suspension, and you can do this if you want to run a particular type of aggressive aerodynamic setup. So looking at the options in the centre, this concerns the options which are which have to be applied to both the left and the right side of the vehicle. So stuff like toe-in angles, it applies to both of them, and also it applies the anti-roll bars obviously to both sides of the vehicle because it's connected to both sides, and so on and so forth. You also find the third spring options for controlling the third spring of the vehicle, if it has one, in this page here. Moving on to the drivetrain tab, the options you see here concern the engine, the gearbox and the differential or differentials of the vehicle. Again, as you can see, there are some more options available for you to play around with than there are in R3E, such as your radiator opening and your fuel map as well, which is analogous to your engine map in R3E, but also all of your gearbox parameters and all of your differential parameters here as well. Now, as you can see, there are several options which are greyed out in the setup screen, and what this basically means is these options are not available on this vehicle. So on this Cadillac DPI, for instance, you can see I can't have anti-lock brakes because the car doesn't come with it, so they're not allowed there. Of course, if you want anti-lock brakes, you can enable that as an assist. But boost pressure, again, because it's a normally aspirated car, I can't adjust that. There's no turbocharger, so that option there is greyed out. Also, you can see that there are a lot more detail parameters of certain things, such as the differential. Now, again, going over the greyed out parameters, you see there is several options of differential available here, but again, only the clutch LSD here on this vehicle is highlighted, which is because it has a clutch LSD, and none of the front differential options are highlighted as well because it doesn't have a front differential. So these are more granular adjustments for your differential, whether it be geared, clutch or viscous. And if you hover over them, you see at the bottom left hand side there is a explanation of what they do. You've got more finite control over what you're doing with settings for the differentials, in particular in R3E, AMS2. So if you want to give your setup a name, you just do that here. So we're just going to call it 1, and you can give it a description, and then you can just save it simply by hitting save, create new setup, and it'll copy over the name you put on there, continue, and it's saved. And whenever you load up the setup, it brings up the name and description there. And also when you're searching them, you can see the description. Yes, this is my test setup here, and here's the name, and here's also who it's created by, and then you can then click on that and load it in. Setup sharing is done differently in AMS2. So rather than having a setup file that you might load into your game, what you can do is you can get setups from leaderboard laps. So what this basically means is that anybody who sets a lap on the leaderboard, their ghost as well as their setup is saved. If we see on the right hand side there is a spanner or a wrench logo, which denotes that they have used a modified setup. If somebody was to set a lap with default setup, there would be no spanner here. If you want to load in a setup from the leaderboard into your game, what you do is you click on Add Ghost, and then you look to find a ghost along with a setup which you want to use. On the left hand side we have your personal best, which will come up. It'll also have the world record, the vehicle class record. Now this is important for differentiating between different cars within a class. So for instance, if you have a P2 setup, a P1 setup, there's different cars. The leaderboard will show all of the times for each of the cars in that class, but you'll only want the setup that pertains to your individual vehicle. So the vehicle record here will give you the fastest option there. And there's also the class record as well. Also your friends and whatever session you've got. So we want to use the fastest setup for our vehicle. So we're going to go to vehicle record here. As we see, this just happens to be the world record because there's only one car in this class. And we click on this and it loads into this option here. What this means is when we start and go into the leaderboard, what you'll see is that the setup is there for you to load in from the setup screen. It will also give you the option to save that setup for use in the non-leaderboard scenarios. So once you're loaded into time trial, you can then go on and load the setup you want to use into your own setup directory. So what you do is you click the spanner or wrench to the right hand side here, and this automatically loads this vehicle setup as your setup that you're running on the vehicle right now. So all you have to do then is basically save it as normal. You give it a new screen there and say, right, I want to do that, continue, and there we go, it's saved the setup. So then I can load in whichever setup I want to do. Now the reason why you have a double entry here is because when you've what it's done is it's loaded in the leaderboard setup temporarily. Now if you were to then exit the game after just doing that and doing your laps and finding a setup you like, that setup will not be saved when you come back into it. So you've always got to remember to actually save that setup if you want to use it. Now going over the setups from the leaderboard, there's a couple of things to be aware of. Because this is a leaderboard setup, this setup is optimized just for one lap. So you've got to be aware that brake duct openings and radiator openings and so on and so forth are possibly not idealized for a race scenario. This is more important in terms of things like boost pressure, where you've got you can run a very high boost for qualifying, but that may not be suitable for the race. So again, as with any setup, just take a look at what's there and test it out. If you find that it's using the tires up too much, or it's using too much fuel, if you can use it in a race, look in the settings and you'll probably find that some things like the radiator ducts are over constrained. So here we've got a radiator duct opening at the rear of 20%, and that is fine for one lap, but in a race scenario you probably find your rear brakes are overheating.